Dinner was served, then silence fell. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Wolfe carves into the poisoned turkey mystery. If there's one thing you can count on in the Wolfe household, it's that lunch will be served at exactly 1 o'clock, no matter who's been murdered, arrested, or elected. So when the doorbell rang at 11:15 that Wednesday, I figured whoever was pressing it had less than 2 hours to make themselves both interesting and profitable, or they'd be seeing the brown side of our front door again. I was in the office, handling the morning mail while Wolfe was upstairs communing with his orchids. The air was still holding the remnants of that special brand of silence you only get in the brownstone, thick, comfortable, and slightly judgmental. When the bell rang again, twice in quick succession, I sighed and swung out of my chair. Now don't get me wrong, I don't resent unexpected visitors. They're the yeast that keeps the detective business rising. But there's a certain kind of visitor who shows up at 11:15 on a Wednesday, too late for breakfast, too early for lunch, and 9 times out of 10, they've got something delicate, desperate, or downright dumb to unload. This one turned out to be delicate and desperate, with just a dash of dumb. She was tall, mid-30s, with the sort of bearing that said she'd spent more years telling people what to do than asking for favors. A white wool coat, gloves the color of lemon peel, and a face that had practiced composure until it cracked around the edges. When she said my name, it wasn't a question. "Mr. Goodwin, you'll take me to Mr. Wolfe, please." "I might. That depends. Are you here about orchids, cuisine, or crime?" She hesitated, just long enough to prove she was too upset to play along. "It's a matter of poison," she said. Now that'll do it. Poison has a way of jumping the line to the top of Wolfe's list of unacceptable subjects, right between exercise and emotion. I opened the door wider. "Come in, Mrs. Lydia Vandermeer." That rang a soft bell. The Vandermeers had made a few headlines in the past decade. Old money, new scandal. A family tree that grew sideways. I led her to the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk, the one that's broken in just enough to remind you it's not yours. "Mr. Wolfe will be down in 10 minutes. He's communing with orchids." "I'll wait," she said, and crossed her legs like a woman who had once been sure of everything, but wasn't anymore. Wolfe made his entrance 12 minutes later, which by his standards counted as haste. He filled the doorway like he always does, vast, serene, and faintly offended by gravity. "Good morning, madam," he said, settling into his chair. "Mr. Goodwin informs me you have a matter involving poison. Please be explicit." Mrs. Vandermeer looked at him, then at me, and then back again, as if she were deciding whether she'd stumbled into the right kind of madness. "It's not murder," she said. "At least not yet." That was new. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a white envelope. "Yesterday morning, I received this." I took it over to Wolfe. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, the kind you order with embossed initials when you've stopped pretending to be modest. Written across it in block letters was, "The turkey is poisoned. Do not serve it. No signature. No return address." Wolfe read it twice, folded it once, and placed it beside his beer glass. "Madame, has anyone in your household died of late?" "No." Then I failed to see the urgency. Her lips tightened. "Because the turkey in question will be served tomorrow evening, at the Vandermeer Foundation's annual Thanksgiving dinner. 50 guests, governors, trustees, benefactors, and my husband." "Ah." Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. "A communal meal, social ritual masking ambition, a fertile environment for deceit." I glanced at him. "You're considering this, sir?" "Puis, I'm considering digestion, but if Mrs. Vandermeer's turkey is indeed poisoned, my digestion may suffer vicariously. Continue, madam." She drew a breath. "I want you to find out who sent that note, and whether they mean it." Surely, Wolfe murmured. Your husband employs staff for such trifles. Her tone went brittle. My husband employs only those who flatter him. I require someone who can think. That caught Wolfe's attention. Insult and flattery in one breath. His kind of music. I presume, he said, you have considered the possibility of hoax? I have, but there's more. This morning the cook found traces of white powder in the kitchen waste bin. She swears she didn't use any such thing. Indeed. Wolfe opened his eyes. You have brought a sample? She hesitated. No. I told the staff to dispose of it. I didn't want a scene. I could feel Wolfe's sigh before I heard it. You wish me to determine, in the absence of evidence, whether your bird of civic virtue has been adulterated. I want you to find who would do such a thing, she said. And why? Wolfe regarded her with the stillness of a man reading a weather map for moral storms. Mr. Goodwin, Mrs. Vandermeer's address, please. She provided it. A Park Avenue apartment that probably had chandeliers for its chandeliers. He nodded once. Return tomorrow morning at 11, madam. In the meantime, Mr. Goodwin will visit your home, inspect your kitchen, and make such inquiries as he deems suitable. Her relief was quick and genuine. She stood, smoothing her gloves. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You don't know what this means. I assure you, madam, Wolfe said. I intend to. When she was gone, Wolfe sat silent for a long moment, gazing at the empty chair as though it had just told him a secret. Finally he said, Archie, attend to this promptly. I dislike the odor of sentiment, but I dislike the odor of deceit far more. Sure, I said, but I'll need to know what exactly we're looking for. He closed his eyes again. We are looking, he said, for a poisoned turkey, but the venom will not be in the meat. I didn't bother with a hat. For kitchen work, a hat is a costume, and I wasn't going to a pageant. I had my notebook, a clean handkerchief. Some cooks rate it higher than a badge, and a phone number for the Vandermeer apartment scribbled where I wouldn't lose it. I told Fritz I might be back late for lunch, which made him compress his lips like a man asked to water his sauce. When I went to tell Wolfe I was heading out, I found him where I'd left him, tilted back a degree in the chair, eyes at half-mast, engaged in the strenuous activity of thinking. Any particular scent you want me to follow first? I asked, or shall I let the turkey gobble? Begin with the kitchen staff, he said without moving a facial muscle. The cook's certainty is either a feather in the pillow or a thorn in it. I want to know which. Attend to the rubbish, the shopping lists and the household credules. In a kitchen, time is geometry. Noted. Anything else? Yes. He opened his eyes. Observe Mr. Vandermeer if he is present. Pride can season a plot more than salt. I was reaching for the doorknob when the bell went again. It wasn't uncertain. It had the rhythm of someone used to having doors opened on the first try. I glanced back at Wolfe. He didn't glance at me. A man who can ignore a doorbell could probably ignore thunder. I went and found out. The small vestibule filled up fast. Mrs. Vandermeer was in front, her composure lacquered on, and behind her were two people who managed to make the air feel closer. The man was 50, tall, tan to the point of parody in late November, with a jaw that looked machine-made. The woman was slim, mid-20s, with dark hair pulled into a coil, and eyes that had spent a lot of time noticing other people's mistakes. Archie, Mrs. Vandermeer said, not waiting to be asked, my husband, Curtis Vandermeer, and this is Miss Eleanor Way, our director of operations for the foundation. Husband and director. I stepped back and let the trio file in. Curtis Vandermeer gave the lobby a glance that appraised it like a company he was thinking of buying, then tried it on me. The look promised he'd be charming if he decided I deserved it, which he wasn't deciding yet. Miss Way didn't waste motions. She took in the rugs, the umbrella stand, and the polished brass of the knob like someone who respects an ecosystem before stepping through it. In there, I told them, and led the parade into Wolfe's office. Now, outsiders don't disturb the brownstone by existing. They disturb it by believing it is theirs to arrange. I watched for it the moment they crossed the threshold. Curtis made for the red chair and turned it 3 inches so he could angle at Wolfe like a quarterback sighting a receiver. Miss Way set her leather folio on the corner of Wolfe's desk as if it had paid rent there. Lydia stayed where she had been earlier, but her shoulders had pulled up as if the coat had gotten heavier. Wolfe didn't move a finger for any of it, which didn't mean he missed it. He gave them a nod that would have satisfied a Roman emperor at a petition. "Mr. Vandermeer," he said. "Miss Way." Curtis produced a smile you could trademark. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm grateful you've agreed to advise us. Lydia has told me you have concerns." "That reverses the roles," Wolfe murmured. "Your wife has concerns. I have an appetite for coherence." Curtis's smile flicked at me for partnership and found none. "Then here's coherence. The note is a prank. Lydia is susceptible to melodrama. She's always been idealistic about the foundation. Someone wants a thrill. We will not allow a anonymous piece of stationery to derail an event with 50 donors who expect us to be adults." Miss Way, coolly. "Security is handled. The guest list is vetted. The caterer is licensed. The kitchen at our venue is sealed until tomorrow morning. We have an NYPD liaison for crowd control. I don't see a failure mode that includes poison unless the turkey sprouts a conscience." I gave her 1 point for wit and 1 for fog. Wolfe regarded them with that benign attention he keeps in a jar on the top shelf. "Your precautions," he said, "are admirable, as scaffolding. Which is to say, they are not the building. Poison is not a stage trick. It is purpose distilled. Mr. Goodwin will examine your past, not your barricades." Curtis's jaw did a fractional click. "Our past?" "Your households," Wolfe corrected, "lazy as syrup. The hands that have access to your food, the minds that have access to your reputation, the friends who must applaud, the enemies who must remain silent." "You're implying," Curtis began, then stopped, eyes sliding to Lydia. She met it. "Curtis, I didn't hire Mr. Wolfe to flatter me. I hired him to protect our guests." "And our money," Miss Way put in, not to be outdone. "If a donor reads about poison at the Vandermeer Foundation on a blog's headline mill, they don't send an extra check to comfort us. They send a lawyer." That earned her another point. Curtis, calculating, turned back to Wolfe. "Very well. What do you want?" "A list," Wolfe said. "Your caterer, your household staff, your foundation staff, your trustees. Names, tenure, grievances if you know them, and a schedule for the next 36 hours. Mr. Goodwin will also need access to your apartment kitchen and to the foundation venue." Miss Way moved the folio an inch, back from Wolfe's desk corner, which was either respect or strategy. "I can provide logistics," she said. "We work on Monday schedules in a Thursday world. But I can't give you grievances. People confide up and complain down." Wolfe half smiled. "They confide sideways more often than not. Mr. Goodwin has a way of standing where confessions trip." Curtis rapped his fingers once on the chair arm. "And your fee?" Wolfe's eyelids drooped to their resting position. $2,000 as a retainer, and another 3 upon satisfactory resolution. If the turkey proves innocent, but the motive proves not, you will not find the bill unjust." Curtis didn't blink. He produced a checkbook, wrote, tore, and passed, as if it relieved an itch. Lydia watched his hand with a look that had memory in it. Miss Way's pen was already ticking boxes on a page that hadn't existed when she sat down. Business handled. I should have been out the door, but the brownstone had another ripple coming. Fritz knocked and entered without waiting, which is a privilege of his species. He nodded to Wolfe and gave me a look fit for the back hall. "Excuse me, Mr. Goodwin. A messenger delivered a parcel for you." He held up a square white bakery box, tied with red and white string, the kind that makes women in movies hum hymns. "Addressed to the office?" Curtis stood a little straighter. Lydia's fingers tightened, and Miss Way wrote a new box to tick. Wolfe's gaze pivoted to the box as if it had spoken Latin. "For me," I said. "I'm flattered." Fritz's nose wasn't enjoying itself. "There is no return address." "Set it on the desk," Wolfe instructed, voice even. "Mr. Goodwin, you will not touch the contents. The string first with your penknife, avoiding the knot. Then lift the lid from one corner. Keep your face away. When Wolfe gives a recipe, you follow it." I slit the string and raised the lid with enough caution to keep two mothers happy. Inside, in a bed of waxed paper, was a small golden-brown turkey roulade, neatly trussed and glistening. Beside it, a folded card. My name on the outside, printed, the same block letters that had warned Lydia. I didn't reach. I used the penknife to tease it open and spread it on the blotter. 4 words for your expert palate. Miss Way said very quietly. "Well," Curtis blurted, "this is ridiculous." Lydia didn't speak. Wolfe's breathing was a metronome. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "your sodium nitroprusside is where you left it." "In the pantry cabinet and the starch indicator?" "Bring them, and the distilled water. Mr. Goodwin, clear the corner of the desk. We shall at least learn whether our visitor wishes to tantalize or to kill." "Here," Curtis demanded, recognizing at last that he was not the only host in the room. "Here," Wolfe said, and for the first time his voice had an edge. "My house has been used as a delivery, route for insinuation. It will not be used as a theater for stupidity." The room adjusted itself around that sentence. Miss Way moved her folio off the desk entirely. Curtis kept his hands to himself. Lydia exhaled as if she'd been holding air since 11:15 yesterday. Fritz returned with a tray that would have made a chemist nod. Small dropper bottles, a beaker, a porcelain plate. Wolfe directed me to cut a sliver from the roulade's end. No touching. And I obliged, sliding the piece onto the plate with the blade. He told Fritz 2 drops of the nitroprust, then a rinse, then starch. His voice clipped, exact, and as steady as the kitchen clock. We watched a pale ghost of color swirl and settle. Fritz and I looked to Wolfe. He considered the plate as if it were an offensive paragraph. "Not cyanide," he said, "and not an obvious arsenical starch interaction. It proves very little. It proves enough." "Enough for what?" Curtis snapped. "For me to insist," Wolfe said, "that Mr. Goodwin begins with your kitchen immediately. Miss Way, your lists by courier in an hour. Mr. Vandermeer, you will not make a pronouncement to anyone, not staff, not donors, regarding pranks or hoaxes. Whoever sent this intends to force us to speak carelessly. We will not oblige." Curtis lifted his hands. "Surrender or theater." "Then go." "I intend to," I said, sliding my knife back into my pocket. "If anyone else plans to send lunch, tell them to use my usual deli." Wolfe's eyes met mine. "Bring back facts, Archie. I've acquired an appetite." It took me an hour to get to the Vandermeer apartment, and about 4 minutes to understand that it wasn't a home. It was a museum with plumbing, the kind of place where furniture never squeaks, clocks never tick, and nothing living had dared shed dust in the past decade. The maid who let me in looked like she'd been briefed by an attorney, which was confirmed when she said, "Mrs. Vandermeer is out, sir. Mr. Vandermeer and Miss Way are both at the foundation. You are expected." Expected is one of those words that can mean welcome or tolerated. This was the second variety. She led me through a hallway wide enough to drive a modest truck down and into a kitchen that could have hosted a church social. 2 cooks were stationed at opposite counters, one tall and worried, the other short and trying not to show it. They turned to look at me with the synchronized dread of people who've already been blamed once this week. "Mr. Goodwin," said the tall one, drying her hands. "I'm Mrs. Quinn, head cook. Mrs. Vandermeer told us you'd be coming." I nodded and offered a smile that didn't promise anything. Then I'll try not to get in the way. You found the powder in the waste bin? She pointed toward a metal receptacle by the sink. Yesterday morning, yes. I'd thrown out the peelings from the vegetable stock, and there it was. White, like sugar, but heavier. I told the housekeeper to lock it up, but Mrs. Vandermeer said to get rid of it. I did. I wish I hadn't. I walked to the bin and crouched. It had been scrubbed out since, but residue leaves traces for eyes that know where to look. There were faint gray streaks at the bottom. Soap or ash? Hard to tell. I took out my notebook and used a clean envelope to scrape a few granules into it. It wasn't science, but Wolfe always said, evidence, like seasoning, should not be over-applied. A hint will do. The second cook, a freckled woman named Etta, spoke up. Mr. Vandermeer said it was nonsense, said people spread gossip because they envy success. Did you agree? I asked. She flushed. I don't envy him anything. Mrs. Quinn shot her a warning glance. We're careful here, she said low. But the foundation people come and go, and they treat the kitchen like a thoroughfare. Deliveries, samples, tastings. It's not all ours anymore. I made a note of that. When cooks start calling their kitchen not ours, there's trouble simmering. I asked to see the pantry. Mrs. Quinn led me through an archway lined with copper pots that could have been mistaken for small sculptures. The pantry shelves were lined in neat ranks of labeled jars, imported spices, salts, vinegars. Everything tidy except for one jar that had been moved a few inches off alignment, a jar of sumac. I don't claim to be an expert, but Fritz had educated me enough to know sumac has a twin brother in the poison business. Similar color, different outcome. I didn't touch it. Who handles the seasonings? I asked. I do, said Mrs. Quinn, puzzled. That's not out of place. At least I didn't move it. Who else has? She hesitated. Miss Way did last week. She came in to discuss the dinner menu. She wanted to see how the spice mix for the roast differed from the caterer's recipe. That fit nicely into the folder in my head labeled interesting. When I left the kitchen, I told Mrs. Quinn to keep the bin untouched from now on. No cleaning, no disposal. She nodded with the solemnity of a nun. The next stop was the Vandermeer Foundation building, a marble and glass structure on Madison Avenue that looked as if it had been designed by someone allergic to warmth. Miss Way's assistant met me in the lobby, where money had been disguised as taste. She led me to Miss Way's office, a cube of modern glass and unearned calm. Miss Way was behind the desk, flipping through a file like it owed her money. Efficient, she said when she saw me. You've already been to the apartment. Did the turkey confess? Not yet, I said. But the pantry did whisper your name. She looked up. Excuse me? I told her about the spice jar, the powder in the bin, and Mrs. Quinn's recollection of her visit. Her expression didn't flinch, but her voice lowered. I asked about the spice because the foundation event uses our chef's recipe, not Mrs. Quinn's. I wanted consistency. I didn't touch anything else. That's not an accusation, I said. It's just a fact with teeth. She regarded me coolly. You think I'm tampering with the Vandermeer kitchen? If I wanted Curtis Vandermeer dead, I'd have him audited. That got a half smile out of me. You'd need a strong stomach either way. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She frowned, picked it up, and listened. Whatever she heard made her shoulders lock. Thank you, she said, then hung up. Problem? I asked. Her reply was careful. The Foundation's catering company just reported a break-in. Someone entered their cold storage sometime last night. Nothing stolen, except the turkey assigned to the Vandermeer dinner. I didn't bother hiding the whistle. So the bird's gone missing. It seems that way. That's not coincidence, I said. That's choreography. She stared at the polished surface of her desk, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted. Mr. Goodwin, If this is someone's idea of a threat, if this is about Curtis, it won't end with a turkey. The Foundation has enemies. Every institution that gives away money does. I thought about Wolfe back in his chair, the way his mind moved slower than anyone's heartbeat, but always toward the one nerve that twitched. You've got enemies, I said. So does your employer. But poison letters and missing poultry don't start as business disputes. They start personal. She didn't answer that. She pressed a key on her intercom and said, "Tell security to pull all footage from the loading dock after midnight, and get the caterer's manager on the line." I let her make her calls and stepped to the window. From up there, Madison Avenue looked like an obedient line of ants. New York is good at making conspiracies look ordinary. When she was done, she turned back to me. "You'll report this to Mr. Wolfe?" "Before dinner," I said. "He'll be thrilled. Nothing improves his appetite like treachery served cold." "Then tell him this," she said. "Whoever took that turkey didn't do it for hunger. They wanted attention." That, I thought, was Wolfe's department. He collected attention the way others collect stamps, rare, precise, and fatal to the careless. I left her office, thinking of the missing bird, the white powder, the anonymous note, and Wolfe's calm certainty. The venom will not be in the meat. I began to believe him. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the November dusk had folded over the city like a gray blanket that didn't quite fit. I'd barely hung up my hat when I smelled beer, Wolfe's particular brand of sanity, and found him where the laws of physics required him to be. In his chair, feet planted, gaze half-lidded, looking as if he'd been carved there by a sculptor with a fondness for inertia. The box from that morning sat on the side table, the turkey roulade now sealed under glass like a relic. "You were expected an hour ago," he said without opening his eyes. "I'm touched. Did you miss me or the evidence?" "The evidence does not talk back." I gave him a summary that hit all the points. Mrs. Quinn's nervous powder, the jar of sumac that had apparently grown legs, Miss Way's trip through the kitchen, and, most appetizing of all, the stolen turkey from the caterer's cold storage. He didn't interrupt once. That's never good. Wolfe interrupting means he's still in the process of disagreeing. Wolfe silent means he's already miles ahead. When I finished, he reached for his glass and said, "We will have dinner at 8:30 instead of 8. I raised an eyebrow. "To celebrate the missing turkey?" "To accommodate Mr. Panzer." "Saul?" "Yes. I've already telephoned him. He's obtaining details on the catering facility's security and the employees with keys. Someone stole a turkey, Archie, but not for sustenance. The theft was symbolic, a message. If I am to interpret it, I require the dialect." "Miss Way thinks it's about the Foundation's enemies," I said. "She's half expecting a manifesto to come with dessert." "She may be correct," Wolfe murmured. "Philanthropy often disguises rivalry. Altruism offends the ambitious, but the method, that speaks of something more intimate." I dropped into my chair, which squeaked in protest. "Then you think this is personal? Between the Vandermeers?" "I think," he said, "that Mrs. Vandermeer's composure was the practiced calm of a woman accustomed to managing a man's follies, and that Mr. Vandermeer's vanity was offended by her initiative. One cannot poison a turkey without first poisoning trust. Find me who had the first taste." Before I could answer, Fritz appeared in the doorway, uncharacteristically stiff. "Excuse me, Mr. Wolfe. There is a gentleman wishing to see Mr. Goodwin. He says it is urgent." "Name?" I asked. He would not give one, but he insists it concerns the Vandermeers. Wolfe frowned. "Show him in, Fritz." The man who entered looked as if he'd been drafted from a forgotten chapter of the Depression. Gray overcoat, collar frayed, hat pulled low, eyes red at the rims. His voice had the rasp of someone who'd been arguing with cigarettes. "You're Archie Goodwin." "Guilty." He took a breath. "I work for the caterer. Grayson Foods. Name's Lou Renner. I heard you were asking about the missing turkey. I figured you'd want to know there wasn't just one gone. There were two. Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction wider. Two? That's right. Only one was on the Vandermeer order, though. The other was from a private request. Paid cash. No record, no signature. Same weight, same dressing, but the crate tag was blank. The night it happened, the lock wasn't broken. It was picked. Clean job. Cameras caught nothing. The night guards knew. Says he saw a van pull out around 2 a.m., marked as Foundation Catering Transport. Problem is, we don't have any van like that. Who has keys to the cold storage? I asked. 4 of us, Renner said. Me, the night supervisor, a driver named Harris, and the company's secretary. But listen, this part's what got me spooked. This morning I found something in my locker. A note. He pulled a folded scrap of paper from his pocket and handed it over. Same neat block lettering. Stay out of the kitchen. The feast isn't for you. Wolfe exhaled slowly, like steam from a kettle. Thank you, Mr. Renner. You have done well to bring this. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. Renner looked at him, then at me. You think this is some kind of joke? No, I said. And if it is, it's one we'd prefer to end before the punchline. After he left, I closed the door and turned to Wolfe. Now we've got notes, stolen turkeys, and a caterer being warned off his own job. Whoever's cooking this is working from a twisted recipe. Indeed, Wolfe said. And observe the consistency. Every act mimics domestic ritual. The warning notes, the substitution of food, the intrusion into the kitchen. Our culprit understands the symbolism of nourishment. They are replacing sustenance with threat. Meaning what? Meaning, he said, that this is not about poison at all. It is about control. He leaned forward slightly, Wolfe's version of a full sprint. Someone wishes to demonstrate mastery over the Vandermeer's domestic and social world. They have chosen the feast because it is Mrs. Vandermeer's domain, yet the guest list and prestige belong to her husband. The crime will humiliate both, but differently. Sounds like someone with a grudge big enough to carve. Precisely. Tomorrow you will interview the Foundation's trustees and senior staff. Begin with those who have known the Vandermeers longest. Money breeds intimacy, and intimacy breeds resentment. The doorbell rang again, sharp, deliberate. Fritz's steps followed, then his voice. Inspector Kramer, sir. Wolfe's brows knit in irritation. Confound it! Send him in! Kramer entered like a man allergic to furniture. He nodded to me, ignored the beer, and got straight to it. Wolfe, you've got a mess on your hands. The Vandermeer cook just reported a break-in at their apartment, about an hour ago. No valuables gone, just the kitchen ransacked. I felt the room tighten. Wolfe's lips thinned. Was anything taken? Not unless you count the spice rack, Kramer said dryly. Somebody dumped every jar in the sink except one. Left it standing right in the center like a trophy, a jar of sumac. I whistled low. That's our friend's signature move. Kramer jabbed, a finger at me. If you know something, Goodwin, talk. I don't like kitchen theatrics that end up in homicide reports. No one's dead yet, I said. Then let's keep it that way. Wolfe gestured for calm, though his voice carried an edge of irritation. Inspector, I suggest you allow me to proceed quietly. The culprit seeks attention. Your involvement, however competent, will feed their appetite. Kramer grunted. You think this is your kind of case? Fine. But I'm putting a patrol outside the Vandermeer place tonight. You trip over something, you call me. Understand? When he left, Wolfe said nothing for a while. The silence filled up the corners like steam. Finally, he murmured, Archie, prepare a list of the Foundation's guests for tomorrow's dinner. Cross-reference it with the trustees' names and household staff. We will invite them all here tomorrow evening. Here. Yes. If the feast is poisoned, let the table be mine. I stared at him. You're going to bait them. He gave a single, slow nod. The intruder has turned nourishment into menace. Very well. We shall feed them truth and see who chokes. The next morning began with the sound of the phone at 7:30, which meant someone out there either had no manners or a very pressing death wish. I let it ring twice before picking up, because Wolfe believes any man who answers immediately is announcing his desperation. "This is Goodwin." "Saul," came the voice, low and precise. "Your bird thief has fingerprints?" That woke me up faster than coffee. "Talk." "They're partial. Belong to a woman, no match in local files. Found on the latch of the cold storage door in the empty crate. The night guard saw the fake catering van again this morning, parked 2 blocks away from the facility. Empty, abandoned. It's registered to a dummy address. Midtown office that doesn't exist. That's efficiency for you. Anything in the van? Just a trail of feathers and a faint smell of citrus cleaner. Someone wiped it down after use. Who rented the cold storage keys? The night supervisor, Harris. He's clean. But here's what's odd. He says 2 weeks ago, someone from the Vandermeer Foundation called to confirm their order using a different number. He didn't think much of it since the voice knew every detail. Guest count, menu, delivery time, but that number's dead now. That was enough to make my morning. Thanks, Saul. Stay on, Harris. See if he remembers the voice. Accent, tone, anything. Already working on it. When I hung up, Wolfe was descending from the plant rooms, which at that hour was like watching an eclipse occur 10 minutes early. He looked mildly annoyed that the world still existed. "Report," he said, without pausing for greetings. I gave him Saul's findings. He listened in silence, then said, "A woman. Good. The style of subterfuge. Fits. You're thinking Miss Way?" "Not yet, but she's capable. The foundation's structure is intricate, which means the channels for deceit are convenient. Have you summoned the trustees for this evening?" "I've called 3. The others are playing phone tag. One of them, a Dr. Harland Voss, was particularly interested. Said he'd been expecting a call from us." Wolfe grunted. "Curious. Did he explain why?" "He said, and I quote, 'I told Lydia this would end badly.'" Then he hung up. "That," Wolfe said, "requires exploration. You will visit him this afternoon. And before that, breakfast, then the Vandermeer." I didn't argue. Fritz served eggs with more ceremony than most courts apply to coronations. Wolfe ate in contemplative silence while I called the Vandermeer apartment to confirm they were alive. Lydia answered, sounding composed but frayed at the edges. "Yes, Mr. Goodwin. The police came last night. They said nothing was taken, but everything feels violated. Curtis is furious. He thinks it's all a ploy for attention." "Whose attention?" I asked. "Mine, he assumes. He's wrong. I don't know whose." "Then I'll be there at 11, I said. "Keep the kitchen sealed. No one cleans, no one rearranges." When I got there, the apartment was a battlefield disguised as luxury. A maid was dusting the hall with the speed of guilt, and Lydia met me in a silk robe that probably cost more than my suit. Her eyes were hollow in a way even good makeup can't repair. "It's all exactly as they left it," she said, leading me to the kitchen. The sight could have made Fritz faint. The spice rack was overturned, the sink full of sodden powder and glass. Every jar smashed except one, sumac, standing like a survivor at a crime scene. I circled the room slowly. Any idea when it happened? Between 9 and midnight. I was upstairs reading. Curtis was at a business dinner. The housekeeper noticed the mess at 11. "Anyone else in the apartment?" "Just her, and the night porter downstairs." The porter, I later learned, was a quiet man who'd been with the building 10 years. He hadn't seen or heard a thing, which meant the intruder either had a key or an invisibility cloak. Back upstairs, Lydia stood by the window, fingers twisting a handkerchief. "Mr. Goodwin," she said quietly, "this isn't about the foundation. It's about us. I waited. Curtis and we haven't been well. He's been involved with someone at the foundation, I think. I never had proof, only rumors. That narrows it down to half the payroll, I said. Anyone specific? She hesitated. Miss Way. She's competent, beautiful, and utterly devoted to him. He denies it, of course. But I've seen her look at him. I didn't say what I was thinking, that looking at Curtis Vandermeer too long might lower a person's IQ. Instead, I said, "And the dinner tomorrow?" "It must go on," she said. "The trustees expect it. The governor's wife is attending. Canceling would look like panic." "That might be the idea," I said. Her eyes met mine, suddenly sharp. "You think this is revenge?" "I think whoever's doing this wants to watch something you and your husband care about collapse in front of an audience." She said nothing for a moment, then, "You'll tell Mr. Wolfe?" "Everything, and he'll tell me what to think about it." I left her there and made my next stop at the address of Dr. Harlan Voss. He lived on East 78th in a townhouse that smelled faintly of pipe smoke and old opinions. The man himself answered the door. Tall, white-haired, wearing a cardigan that had probably been loyal since the Hoover administration. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, as if I'd been expected since Tuesday. "Come in." The place was neat, scholarly, and sterile. No sign of a Mrs. Voss, which explained the order. He led me to a study where the walls were lined with books that hadn't been touched in years. "You mentioned you told Mrs. Vandermeer this would end badly," I said. "And how?" He took a long breath. "Curtis Vandermeer is ambitious, but not clever. He's built his foundation on favors, not principles. 2 years ago, he dismissed a researcher, Dr. Leland Kraft, under suspicious circumstances. Accused him of falsifying grant data, publicly humiliated him. Kraft vanished from New York after that. Lydia pleaded with Curtis to reconsider. He refused. And you think Kraft is back for seconds?" "I don't think," Voss said. "I know. Last month, Lydia received an unsigned letter. It contained one line, 'A feast for liars.' She showed it to me. I told her to take it seriously. She didn't." That earned a long pause. "Did she show it to her husband?" Curtis laughed. He thought it was a crank. But I remember Kraft's eyes when he left the foundation. They were calm, too calm. I thanked him and left with more than I'd brought. On the cab ride back, the pieces began to stir. Poison warnings, a stolen turkey, a man with a ruined career, and a household cracking under its own polish. Wolfe would chew on that and find the bone. When I walked into the office, he was at his desk with a fresh beer and an open ledger. He didn't look up when he asked, "You have something palatable?" "Maybe more than one dish. Try this. Dr. Leland Kraft, ex-employee, humiliated and vanished. Likely our ghost in the pantry." His eyes flickered. "Excellent, Archie. Excellent." Then he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and smiled faintly. "The turkey, the notes, the powder, they're all seasoning. The true entree will be served tomorrow night, and we, my friend, must be ready to taste it first." The night before the Vandermeer Foundation dinner was one of those rare evenings when the brownstone felt tense. Not noisy, not hectic, just tight. You could sense it in the air, like a violin string tuned a shade too high. Fritz was in the kitchen fussing with something aromatic enough to convince a priest to sin, but even that didn't soften Wolfe's mood. He was immobile behind his desk, fingers steepled, eyes closed, the picture of intellect marinating. I'd just finished typing the list of expected guests and suspects, 14 names, any of whom could poison a turkey or a marriage with equal skill. Wolfe opened his eyes when I set it on his blotter. 14, he said. "How tidy. Civilization always arranges itself into numbers that fit a table." "I'll tell that to the caterer," I said. Saul called. He's confirmed that our missing man, Dr. Leland Kraft, Hasn't held a steady job since leaving the foundation. He's been off the grid. No fixed address, but a P.O. box registered under an alias that traces back to a mail center on 9th Avenue. Picked up a package there last week. Wolfe nodded faintly. Did Mr. Panzer learn the sender? Anonymous, of course. But the clerk described Kraft as calm, polite, and wearing a pair of gloves on a day that wasn't cold. That sound like a man handling turkey or trouble? Both, Wolfe said. The gloves suggest preparation, not concealment. Gloves are ritual. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. That was Wolfe's way. He'd drop a line like a fisherman and let you wonder if it was bait or wisdom. At 8, the doorbell rang again. I went to answer it, expecting Saul or maybe Mrs. Vandermeer with a fresh panic, but it turned out to be Miss Eleanor Way, looking crisp enough to pass an audit. She held herself with a kind of stillness that made you think of chess pieces, graceful, precise, and never where you expect them. Mr. Wolfe asked to see me, she said, and her tone didn't ask whether he was ready. I ushered her in. Wolfe greeted her with a polite incline of the head. Miss Way, you are punctual, commendable. I prefer order, she said, taking the red chair without being invited. It seems in short supply lately. Indeed. Tell me, how long have you been employed by the Vandermeer Foundation? 4 years, she said. I manage operations, events, and public relations. I know every vendor, every donor, every skeleton in every walk-in closet. A comprehensive resume, Wolfe murmured. And your relationship with Mr. Vandermeer? Her eyes narrowed just enough to register. Professional. Of course. Yet the rumors, persistent as dandelions, suggest otherwise. That earned him a flicker. Just one heartbeat where the mask slipped. You must have better sources than I do, Mr. Wolfe. I have Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said dryly. He listens where others talk. Were you aware that Dr. Leland Kraft, a former Foundation researcher, has resurfaced? That stopped her. Kraft? No, he left under ugly circumstances. The board voted unanimously to terminate him. Yes, for falsifying data. Mr. Vandermeer led the charge. Did he not? He had to, she said too quickly. The Foundation's reputation was safeguarded, Wolfe finished. And Mrs. Vandermeer? She opposed it. I wouldn't know. You would, Wolfe said softly, because you were there. Her breath caught, but she recovered fast. I didn't attend that meeting. Yet you typed the minutes, Wolfe said. A transcript of decisions you did not hear, on paper you initialed. Curious. She stood abruptly. Is this an interrogation? Not at all. It is digestion. Sit down, Miss Way. She hesitated, then did. Wolfe's voice lowered. The cold storage keys, the forged catering call, the missing turkey. These are acts of precision. A woman's touch, perhaps, not because of sentiment, but because of detail. The perpetrator knew the choreography of your event calendar, the schedules of your staff, and the habits of your employer's wife. That knowledge could come only from within. That's ridiculous, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. Possibly, Wolfe said. Yet the flavor of deceit is unmistakable. Dr. Kraft had motive, but not access. You have access, but no motive. At least none you will admit. She rose again, clutching her purse like a shield. If you're implying I'm involved, I imply nothing, Wolfe said calmly. I deduce, and deduction, Miss Way, is the slow cooking of truth. You may go. She left without another word, her composure rattling behind her like loose change. When the door shut, I said, You are hard on her. She is a woman accustomed to command. Discomfort will loosen her tongue later. And if she's innocent, she will stay silent, which will suit me just as well. Wolfe poured himself a second beer. Archie, tomorrow we shall proceed with our gathering. You will ensure that Mrs. Vandermeer, her husband, Miss Way, Dr. Voss, and Mr. Renner attend, along with the principal trustees. Mr. Panzer will observe from the front room. I intend to complete this business here, under my roof. You expect fireworks? Not fireworks, Wolfe said, settling deeper into his chair. A confession, voluntary or otherwise. The next day arrived, dressed in grey, and by late afternoon the brownstone had transformed into a waiting trap. Fritz had been instructed to prepare nothing but coffee, bread, and cold meats. Unpoisonable fare, Wolfe had said, and the chairs were arranged in their familiar half-circle, each one placed with surgical precision. At 7 on the dot, the guests began to arrive. The Vandermeers entered first, Lydia dignified but brittle, Curtis radiating impatience and cologne. Miss Way came next, composed but tense, followed by Dr. Voss and a handful of trustees who looked as if they'd rather be anywhere else. I took coats and names, noting expressions. Lydia avoided Miss Way's eyes. Curtis didn't avoid anything. He was performing confidence. Voss watched everyone like a man waiting for thunder. Wolfe greeted them with the serenity of a hanging judge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for indulging me. You are here because deceit has infected your circle. A harmless bird has been used as its symbol. The feast that was meant to celebrate your charity was to become its corruption." Curtis bristled. "If this is theater, Wolfe, I didn't buy a ticket." "Sit down," Wolfe said, with the quiet authority of gravity. "You are an accessory to foolishness, Mr. Vandermeer, whether you admit it or not. Tonight I intend to identify its author." He glanced at me. "Mr. Goodwin, the item, if you please." I brought forward the glass case containing the turkey roulade. It looked innocent, golden and fragrant, the perfect centerpiece for polite disaster. A murmur went through the room. "This," Wolfe said, "was delivered to my home, intended perhaps as a warning or an invitation. Within it lies not poison, but purpose. Someone wished me to taste their cleverness. I declined. Instead, I intend to make them taste their own." The room went still. Lydia's knuckles whitened on her purse. Miss Way's gaze flicked to Curtis, then away. And Wolfe, perfectly still, said in that heavy, deliberate voice that made every word sound inevitable, "The thief, the forger, and the would-be poisoner are one and the same. The motive was not vengeance, it was possession." Curtis stood. "Possession of what?" "Of you," Wolfe said, "and of what you represent. Vanity, wrapped in philanthropy. Someone loved you enough to destroy you, and the feast was merely the prelude." Every head turned toward Miss Way. But she wasn't looking at Curtis anymore. She was staring at Lydia Vandermeer. And Lydia, calm now, almost serene, said softly, "You see, Curtis, I told you he would find out." Curtis Vandermeer stared at his wife like a man who'd been shoved through the wrong door in his own house. "Lydia, what the hell does that mean?" His voice was half outrage, half disbelief, the sort of tone that wants to sound strong but keeps bumping into guilt on the way out. Lydia didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on Wolfe, calm and luminous in that maddening way only someone who has already decided not to care about the consequences can manage. "It means, Curtis," she said evenly, "that you've been so busy guarding your own vanity, you never noticed someone using it against you." Wolfe didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe loudly enough to prove he was alive. He let the silence hang a second longer, his preferred temperature for human discomfort, then spoke. "Mrs. Vandermeer, if you would clarify." She turned to him. "You said it, yourself, Mr. Wolfe. The venom wasn't in the meat. It was in what the meal stood for. The dinner was never about charity. It was about Curtis, about the illusion of power he built and the people who fed it." Curtis's jaw tightened. "You're trying to blame me. You brought this lunacy into our home." "No," she said with that sudden softness that makes a room colder than shouting ever could. "You did. When you humiliated Leland Craft, when you flirted with your assistant in front of donors, when you made a spectacle of every good thing you ever pretended to do. Miss Way, rigid as sculpture, finally spoke. This isn't helping. Wolfe turned his head fractionally toward her. On the contrary, Miss Way, it helps immensely. We are nearing the end of our menu. All that remains is to identify who arranged the feast. I took a slow step closer to the wall, ready for the kind of outburst that makes furniture suffer, but none came. Curtis's face had gone pale, not with anger, but with calculation. He looked from Lydia to Miss Way, then to Wolfe. So what are you suggesting? That my wife's been, what? Sneaking around kitchens, sending poison threats, stealing birds? She did none of those things, Wolfe said. But she invited them to happen. That got a ripple, the kind of noise people make when they want to speak but realize they're in a courtroom without the right to testify. Wolfe went on, voice heavy and slow, the syllables dropping like stones into still water. Mrs. Vandermeer did not poison your dinner, Mr. Vandermeer. She merely provided the stage upon which another could perform the act. She wanted you frightened, momentarily, shaken enough to look at yourself. She arranged for the first letter, the one warning that the turkey was poisoned. She sent it anonymously, thinking to halt your public spectacle. Unfortunately, she was not alone in her discontent. Lydia's lips parted. Yes, I sent that note, but nothing else. I know, Wolfe said, cutting her off with a small wave of his hand. The note was harmless. You used your own stationery. You disposed of the powder only after your cook discovered it because you knew it was nothing at all, merely baking soda. A signal, not a weapon. But Dr. Leland Craft intercepted your plan. He, or someone acting for him, saw an opportunity to turn your warning into humiliation. He stole the turkey, forged the catering order, and left tokens of threat designed to unnerve your household. He intended, in short, to ruin your husband as your husband had ruined him. Dr. Harlan Voss leaned forward from the edge of his chair. Craft? Then he's alive? Oh, yes, Wolfe murmured. Quite alive, and nearer than you imagine. I saw it then, the flicker that passed across Miss Way's face. It wasn't fear, it was comprehension. Too quick to fake. Wolfe's eyes opened fully, and the weight of his attention dropped squarely on her. Miss Way, you corresponded with Craft after his dismissal. You were sympathetic. You believed him mistreated, even admired his conviction. You met him again, recently. He convinced you to assist him. Not with poison, but with deception. The stolen turkey, the staged break-ins, the notes, all were meant to shake the Vandermeers before the dinner, to force Curtis into retreat. Only he failed to tell you that he also planned to ruin you with them. For the first time that evening, Eleanor Way looked uncertain. That's absurd, she said, but too late. The fight had drained from her tone. Wolfe went on, relentless. You used the Foundation's logistics to access the caterer's orders. You forged the confirmation call. You retrieved the turkey from storage and delivered it to Dr. Craft. He prepared it as his own symbolic act, what he intended to serve tomorrow at the Vandermeer dinner. He planned to replace the catered dish at the last moment, ensuring Curtis Vandermeer's humiliation would be complete and public. But Dr. Craft miscalculated something essential. I stepped in. That Wolfe would be invited to the party? Wolfe gave me a glare, sharp enough to trim hedges. That he was dealing with a woman who possesses scruples. When Miss Way learned Craft's final intention, that he meant to add real poison to his display. She panicked. She intercepted the turkey again, and because she could not confess to either side, she sent it here, to me, hoping I would neutralize the threat without exposing her involvement. The room went utterly silent. Curtis Vandermeer looked at Miss Way as if he'd never seen her before. Lydia had gone pale, her earlier poise melting into something brittle and frightened. Miss Way spoke finally, her voice low and flat. He said he only wanted to frighten Curtis. to make him confess what he did to Kraft. He said it wouldn't hurt anyone. When I found out what he'd planned, yes, I took it. I thought if Mr. Wolfe saw it first. She stopped, hands trembling in her lap. I never meant for it to go so far. Wolfe leaned back, the motion small but conclusive. Intent is irrelevant once the wheels are in motion. You helped set them spinning. Curtis's voice broke the silence, harsh and uneven. You're telling me my event, my foundation, my name, all this, was almost destroyed because 2 women thought I needed a lesson and 1 man wanted revenge? I answered before Wolfe could. You've just described half of human history, Mr. Vandermeer. That earned me a glare, but I didn't mind. Wolfe folded his hands again. Inspector Kramer will be notified. Dr. Kraft will be located within hours. Saul Panzer is already following his trail. Miss Way will remain here until the inspector arrives. Mrs. Vandermeer, you will do nothing. Mr. Vandermeer, you will refrain from speech. It seldom improves matters. Lydia's voice, faint but clear, drifted through the tension. So it ends here. Wolfe regarded her. No. It ends tomorrow, when your dinner proceeds as planned, without deceit, without spectacle. You will serve your guests' honesty, Mrs. Vandermeer. It is rarer than any delicacy. She nodded once. Curtis said nothing. Miss Way sat motionless, a figure carved from remorse. When the guests had gone, the silence in the brownstone was thick enough to chew. Wolfe finally exhaled, long and slow. I told you, Archie, he murmured. The venom was not in the meat. It was in the hunger. Sure, I said. But next Thanksgiving, can we skip the poison course? He closed his eyes. Phooey, bring me beer. By the time Kramer arrived, the brownstone smelled like leftover guilt and Fritz's coffee. It was after 9, and Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair since the guests had left. Miss Way sat in the red chair, pale and silent, her fingers locked together like someone trying to keep a secret from escaping through her skin. I'd offered her water. She refused. She was past thirst. She was in the dry, cold country of regret. Kramer came in carrying the usual fog of suspicion and city grime, accompanied by Sergeant Stebbins, who looked like he was hoping someone would swing first so he could swing back. All right, Wolfe, Kramer growled, hanging his hat on his irritation. You've dragged me here on a cold night and said it was urgent. What's the emergency? Another body or just your appetite? Neither, Wolfe said, unbothered. But you will have one if you delay much longer. The name is Dr. Leland Kraft. He intends to complete an act of revenge tomorrow evening at the Vandermeer Foundation's Thanksgiving dinner. The tools are deception, poison, and a woman's misplaced loyalty. You will find him, Inspector, before the feast begins. Kramer's head turned to me. Translation, Goodwin. I gave him the condensed version. Letters, stolen turkey, forged orders, and a poison plot that had metastasized into melodrama. When I got to Miss Way's involvement, she didn't flinch. She simply stared at her hands. Kramer let out a low whistle. You're telling me this woman helped the guy and then double-crossed him? She helped him to a point, Wolfe said. Her conscience rebelled. That rebellion brought the matter here instead of to the morgue. Kramer grunted. I'll want a full statement. You'll have it, Wolfe said. But first, act. Kraft will not abandon his performance easily. He has spent months arranging it. When the curtain fails to rise, he will force it. Kramer muttered something unprintable but signaled Stebbins to take notes. Where do we find this genius? Wolfe's eyelids lifted. The 9th Avenue Mail Center. He uses a box registered under the alias H.R. Kent. He will visit it tomorrow morning before the post is collected. Have him taken discreetly. If he resists, mention my name. It will confound him. Confound him, Kramer barked. What's that supposed to mean? Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. He sent me the turkey. He wished to impress me. It is a vanity common to the intelligent and unbalanced alike. Kramer stared at him a moment, then looked at me. If this turns into another one of his opera finales, Goodwin, you can tell the coroner I warned you. They left with Miss Way in tow. She didn't protest. She even thanked Wolfe, which was either brave or absurd, depending on your moral compass. After the door shut, Wolfe released a sigh that was half fatigue, half relief. "Archie," he said, "bring the tray. The ordeal of stupidity breeds hunger." "Sure," I said, "but you realize Kramer's going to think you staged half of that scene for your own amusement." "Let him," Wolfe murmured. "He is immune to reason, but susceptible to results." The next morning, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the phone rang again. It was Saul. His voice was cool, steady, and carrying just enough static to mean he was calling from the street. "Got him, Archie. Kraft showed up at the mail center at 8:15 sharp. No fuss. I tailed him to a boarding house near 10th Avenue. Kramer's men are taking over." "What's he look like?" "Thinner than his photographs. Eyes like glass marbles. Calm, though. Too calm. You'd think he was on his way to a lecture, not an arrest." "Keep close," I said. "If he's calm, it's because he's got something left to deliver." By noon, Kramer called. Kraft had been taken in quietly, and the police chemist had confirmed Wolfe's prediction: arsenic salts mixed into the basting glaze of the recovered turkey, enough to fell a platoon. Kraft hadn't resisted, hadn't even denied it. He'd simply said, "They poisoned me first." When I relayed that to Wolfe, he nodded once. "He means moral poison, the corruption of pride, perhaps the betrayal of belief. Such victims seldom recover." "Yeah, well, I'll stick to physical poison," I said. "Easier to test for." He ignored that. "Mrs. Vandermeer must be informed that her dinner may proceed untainted. You will telephone her. Convey my compliments and my counsel. She must not mention Dr. Kraft's name to the press. Scandal feeds longer than guilt." I made the call. Lydia's voice came through quiet, almost relieved. "Mr. Wolfe," she said when I explained, "has saved more than a dinner. He's saved appearances, which in our world counts as survival." I didn't argue. She asked if Wolfe would attend the dinner after all. I said no. He'd rather debate ethics with his orchids than shake hands with society. She didn't sound disappointed. That night, I found Wolfe in the office again, book open on his lap, beer within easy reach. The city's sounds filtered through the window, the low hum of cabs, the wind scuffing against, the stone, the world pretending nothing had almost happened. "It's over then," I said. "Kramer will get his headlines, the Vandermeers get their dinner, and Miss Way gets probation if she's lucky. Not a bad ratio." "Indeed," Wolfe said, closing his book. "Though the balance of justice and mercy is rarely measured in equal cups." "Still," I said, "I'd call it a win. No bodies, no lawsuits, and nobody rearranged the kitchen again. That's progress." He gave me a look that belonged in a museum. "Progress, Archie, is a delusion. What you call resolution is merely cessation. The world ceases its noise for a moment so we may hear our own." "That's poetic," I said. "You been reading Marcus Aurelius again?" "Pfui. I require no Roman to tell me the folly of man. One Vandermeer suffices." Fritz appeared then, announcing dinner. Roast duck, wild rice, and chestnuts, unpoisoned, which I appreciated. Wolfe rose, slowly but with the dignity of an empire shifting continents, and paused in the doorway. "Archie," he said, "you observed Mrs. Vandermeer's final remark, that appearances are survival. It is a philosophy that breeds both philanthropy and ruin. Dr. Kraft lacked that armor. Miss Way borrowed it and found it too heavy. Only Mrs. Vandermeer wears it comfortably. Thus she will dine, and her husband will toast her, and the world will applaud an illusion preserved." I grinned. "And you'll eat duck instead of turkey?" Quite so. He moved toward the dining room. The bird is blameless. Humanity, less so. We sat down. Fritz poured the beer, and for a long moment the brownstone was quiet again. The good kind of quiet. Outside, the city still spun its web of deceit and hunger, but within those walls, order had been restored. Wolfe carved his duck. I reached for the bread, and the world's poison for one more night stayed where it belonged. Outside our door. Thanksgiving Day dawned grey and cautious, like the city wasn't sure it wanted to commit to civility. I was up early, mostly because I couldn't shake the feeling that our case had ended too neatly. Wolfe believed in symmetry. He liked beginnings and endings to balance, but human beings, as I've learned, have a bad habit of leaving loose threads. By 9, Fritz had already declared the kitchen off limits, which for him meant I was banished entirely. Wolfe, true to form, didn't appear until 10, descending from his plant rooms looking as serene as an overweight Buddha who'd just negotiated world peace. He grunted a greeting and settled into his chair, a book under one arm, a scowl under the other. "Archie," he said, before I could even pour the coffee, "you are unsettled." "You could say that," I admitted. "I like endings that stay ended, but something about this one, it's too quiet. Kramer's happy, the Vandermeers are eating in public again, and Miss Way's cooperating. Everyone's playing their assigned part. Only I can't shake the feeling that someone skipped rehearsal." He peered at me over the rim of his cup. "Intuition or indigestion?" "Neither. Call it experience. Every time we think we've put a ribbon on a case, there's always one knot left to pull." "Indeed." Wolfe set the cup down, his eyes drifting to the window. "You refer to Dr. Kraft." "I refer to him," I said. "Saul says the DA's office is arranging a preliminary hearing, but Kraft hasn't spoken beyond that one line. They poisoned me first." He's calm, polite, almost cheerful. That doesn't fit a man whose plan has just been ruined. Wolfe's brows drew together slightly. Calmness is often a final refuge, but I agree, the man's serenity suggests an unfinished design. "Meaning?" He steepled his fingers. "Meaning that Kraft did not fail entirely. There may yet be an element unaccounted for. A message he still intends to deliver." That wasn't comforting. At 11, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting Kramer. It wasn't. It was Lydia Vandermeer. Her voice was strained, the way silk sounds when you pull it too tight. "Mr. Goodwin, please, you must come." "What's happened?" "It's Curtis. He's collapsed, at the foundation. The doctor says it's not serious, but he thinks it's poison." I covered the receiver. "Wolfe, we've got an encore." His expression didn't change, but his eyes opened a fraction wider. "Where?" "The foundation. Curtis Vandermeer just did his impression of a fainting swan." "Pfui. Bring the car." Now, when Wolfe says, "bring the car," it's like asking a glacier to dance. He almost never leaves the brownstone unless coerced by fate or the Internal Revenue Service. But he said it, and he meant it. 10 minutes later, he was bundled in his overcoat, hat tilted just so, climbing into the sedan with the resignation of a man being forced to visit a dentist. The foundation building was already surrounded by confusion when we arrived. Police cars, reporters, and a handful of staff members milling around like headless pigeons. We were ushered inside by Lydia herself, pale but composed. She led us into the main banquet hall, where tables were still gleaming and untouched, and a group of paramedics hovered near the dais. Curtis Vandermeer lay on a sofa, conscious but shaken, his complexion the color of stale paper. Wolfe took one look and said, "Not fatal." The doctor nodded. "Likely not." He collapsed after taking a sip of wine. No cyanosis, no acute convulsions. More likely a mild alkaloid. Something designed to frighten, not kill. Curtis managed a weak glare. "If this is another of Lydia's melodramas..." "Curtis," she said sharply, "don't." Wolfe moved closer, inspecting the untouched plates, the carafes, the silver gleaming under the chandeliers. "Inspector Kramer?" he asked. "He's on his way," I said. "He'll love this." Wolfe gestured toward the table. "Show me the glass." A waiter handed it to him with the care of a man transporting nitroglycerin. Wolfe sniffed it, then dipped the corner of his handkerchief into the residue. He glanced at me. "Quinine, and trace amounts of bitter almond." I whistled. "Cyanide, then?" "Not enough," Wolfe said. "A fragment of its scent, but no potency. It is a rehearsal, a second warning." Lydia's hands trembled. "But he's arrested." "Kraft's in custody." "Yes," Wolfe said, "which complicates the arithmetic. If Kraft is confined, someone else carries his sum forward." Curtis groaned. "You mean someone's still trying to kill me?" "No," Wolfe said calmly. "Merely to frighten you again. To complete the lesson." I moved toward the back of the room, scanning faces. Most of the staff looked genuinely rattled, but one stood out. A young man in catering whites, standing too still, watching too carefully. When I caught his eye, he looked away. I drifted toward him casually, like a man admiring the floral arrangements. "Nice setup," I said. "You from Grayson Foods?" He swallowed. "Yes, sir. Temporary hire." "Name?" "Eddie Krantz." "Funny," I said, "because Grayson's owner told the police all their regular staff were accounted for." He flinched. Just a flicker, but enough. I grabbed his wrist as he tried to turn. The bottle he'd been holding slipped and shattered. Cheap red wine laced with something that made the air sharp and chemical. Wolfe's voice boomed across the room. "Mr. Goodwin, restrain him, but do not touch the liquid. It is tainted." Kramer arrived 5 minutes later, full of thunder and profanity. Wolfe explained in his patient baritone while Kramer's face shifted from suspicion to grudging admiration. The waiter, Krantz, wasn't a waiter at all. He was a lab assistant, one of Kraft's former protégés. Wolfe concluded Krantz was loyal to Kraft, devoted enough to continue his mentor's work. He likely believed the first failure dishonored both of them, so he came here to redeem it with symbolism rather than murder. His master's final sermon, served in a glass. Kramer grunted. "I'll be damned if philosophy doesn't keep me employed." "You might try gratitude instead," Wolfe suggested. "It improves digestion." Later, when the excitement had cooled and Curtis Vandermeer was declaring he'd sue everyone in sight, Wolfe stood by the window gazing down at the street. Lydia approached him quietly. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "will this ever end?" He didn't turn. "Madame, vanity and vengeance share a long life. But yours, I think, has outlived both." She nodded, almost smiling, and left to tend to her husband's latest crisis. In the car back to the brownstone, I said, "So, that's it? Curtain down." "For now," Wolfe said. "Dr. Kraft's revenge has been served twice and tasted bitter both times. No man survives the appetite for retribution. It consumes the diner before the meal." "And you?" I asked. "Satisfied?" He leaned back, eyes closed. "Satisfaction, Archie, is a vulgar form of relief. I prefer closure." When we reached home, the brownstone's lights were warm against the dusk. Fritz had set the table again. This time there was turkey. Safe, golden, honest. Wolfe looked at it for a moment before sitting. "Fritz," he said, "tonight we eat without irony." For once, I didn't argue. The city could keep its poison. We'd earned our dinner. Dinner that night might have been the most peaceful meal the brownstone had seen in months. Fritz's turkey had achieved the impossible. It was both tender and guiltless. The silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was earned. Wolfe ate with slow, deliberate approval, a man in reconciliation with poultry once more. Halfway through my second helping, I said, "You know, I never thought I'd see you chase a case all the way to someone else's dinner table." That's a level of athleticism that might qualify as unseemly. Wolfe gave me a look. I did not chase. I was drawn. There is a difference. Sure, you were drawn, like a planet to gravity. Still, it's not every day you step outside for a turkey. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, a motion that probably qualified as excitement in his world. The intrusion into this house was intolerable. To have deceit delivered by messenger to my office, under the pretext of cuisine. It was a provocation. Once provoked, I respond. Yeah, I said, and the city trembles. Kramer's still probably down at headquarters, congratulating himself for nabbing Kraft's sidekick before dessert. He may congratulate himself freely, Wolfe said. The results justify his vanity, though not his methods. I, however, am content with the distinction between cause and symptom. Meaning, the cause was not the poison, he said. It was the hunger behind it, the same hunger that drives philanthropy, adultery, and revenge. One cannot be sated by the act, only distracted from the emptiness that preceded it. I shook my head. If you ever start writing philosophy, make sure the publisher includes a warning label. He allowed the ghost of a smile. If I did, Archie, you would be its editor. The margins would overflow with insolence. I'd call it fact-checking, I said. He reached for his beer, lifting it with the care of a judge raising a verdict. Then let us agree that the facts, at least, are conclusive. Dr. Kraft's vengeance failed, but his lesson succeeded. Mrs. Vandermeer will resume her charitable pretense, chastened but intact. Her husband will learn nothing as expected. Miss Way will find a moral vocabulary in the company of her conscience, and Kramer will attribute the restoration of order to police efficiency. It is, as you Americans say, a perfect holiday. Except for the poison, the panic, and the part where you almost ate a murder weapon, I said. But sure, perfect. He didn't rise to the bait. He never does when he's satisfied. For Wolfe, satisfaction doesn't mean happiness. It means balance restored, the world realigned to his peculiar geometry. He leaned back, the corners of his mouth curving faintly. Archie, he said, next year we will dine alone. No clients, no visitors, no birds with ambiguous symbolism. You will secure the turkey personally. Gladly, I said, as long as it doesn't come with a note attached. That got a low rumble. His version of a laugh, short and almost shy, like he'd accidentally enjoyed the moment. Fritz came in then with the coffee, the good kind that smells like calm itself, and set the cups down without a word. The kitchen clinked in the background, the radiator hummed, and the city's noise stayed politely outside. Wolfe lifted his cup, the steam curling between us. The world, Archie, persists in offering us its toxins, emotional, moral, or chemical. But we have antidotes, order, patience, and the occasional decent meal. I raised my cup to that. And beer. He gave me the faintest nod. And beer. Outside, the wind swept down 35th Street, carrying with it the faint echo of laughter from passing strangers, people with their own dinners, their own small salvations. Inside, the brownstone was whole again. The orchids upstairs would be tended tomorrow. Fritz would polish the copper pots. Kramer would file his reports, and Wolfe would sit here, immovable, his mind sharper than any knife in Fritz's kitchen, dissecting the world's folly at his leisure. For my part, I'd earned my seat and the privilege of telling the story. Because when the world sends you poisoned turkeys, it helps to have a boss who prefers logic to luck and a beer to philosophy. Wolfe took one final sip, set his cup down, and said, "The case, Archie, has reaffirmed one truth I never tire of, which is that humanity, for all its cunning, remains incapable of seasoning its own virtue. Too much salt, too little sense." I grinned. Yeah, but every now and then, we get the flavor right. He closed his eyes, the faintest smile still resting there. occasionally. And that was the end of it. The brownstone returned to its peace, the world spun on with its poisons and pretenses, and Nero Wolfe, immovable, infuriating, and irreplaceable, reigned again in the only kingdom that mattered, the quiet, ordered one inside his own mind.